I'm Chance Dorland, and this is The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com. Brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. And as always, I'm joined now by San Antonio Express News courts reporter Elizabeth Zavala. Great to have you back on the show, Elizabeth. Tell me about the case we're going to be discussing today.
Well, hey, Chance, it's great to be back today to talk to you. We had a trial that began last week. It is the murder trial of a man by the name of David Villarreal. He was 29 years old when he was arrested and accused of killing his boyfriend and drug supplier, Aaron Estrada, who also was 29, on October 16th, 2015. Now, Chance, this is a really tragic case and also a cautionary tale about what happens when people smoke methamphetamine. This case involves a group of friends, and the two men that were involved, basically these folks, it sounds like they got together every day and they smoked meth. Now, they all appeared to have, been employed and lived in a nice apartment. The men lived in a very nice apartment on the north side of San Antonio. And something happened, though, on the week that this particular incident took place. We've heard testimony from several witnesses and even heard from the defendant himself. The defendant testified that he became paranoid that his boyfriend was secretly recording him because he alleged that there were hidden cameras all over their apartment. And what Villarreal testified to in his own defense was that in the days leading up to the incident, several things happened. We heard from another witness who was the best friend of the victim that in the days leading up to the incident, David Villarreal and a woman by the name of Jimena Valenzuela, and she testified the day before David did, that they had smoked meth and began driving around town in the days leading up to Aaron Estrada's death. They felt like they were that there were signs in posters and in billboards, and that there were people watching them everywhere. And Jimena testified that they drove around town trying to find these signs, and that they felt like there were people being killed and bodies being dumped, and it was just a very, very intense testimony that she gave. And when the defendant took the stand in his own defense, he testified that his boyfriend kept hidden cameras inside the apartment and was secretly recording videos from several rooms. And the day that this happened, someone had gone to visit them in their apartment, and the defendant said he overheard the two men talking and laughing in a conversation over video recordings. And the defendant told the jury that he asked Aaron to just turn everything off. He wanted his phone off, cameras. He just wanted everything off in the apartment. And he said, and the quote to the jury was, "I was paranoid there were cameras watching me." So he said that Aaron Estrada had told him that everything was off, but Villarreal did not believe him. And so he went to the breaker box and he told the jury that he turned everything off, all of the switches, and that it angered his boyfriend. And Villarreal testified that when he saw his boyfriend take off fast toward the bedroom, Vriel said that he began pulling smoke detectors out of the rooms because he believed that they had hidden cameras in them. And at the same time, he said that he had heard Aaron Estrada in their master bedroom closet. He said he heard a beeping sound that he believed was coming from the gun safe. And he told the jury that he knew that he had a revolver and several like switchblades or knives inside there. So he said that when he heard this beeping, he became scared. So Vriel ended up going to the kitchen and he grabbed a long knife from the dishwasher. What happened next was as they are going toward each other in what Vriel described as a fairly dark apartment, the men met face-to-face in one of the upstairs rooms, and Vriel testified that David, pretty much yelled at him and asked him, what the F are you doing? Why did you pull all the smoke detectors out? And Vriel said that Estrada grabbed him and started choking him. And he said at that point, he pulled a knife out of his back pocket and he remembered stabbing him. So Chance, the jury saw photographs and video of the crime scene after the fact, and there was blood everywhere. Vriel testified that he remembers stabbing Estrada, and he said that the two wrestled throughout the top floor of this two-story apartment, and he said he did not remember how many times he stabbed him. And he said he felt like they were everywhere in that apartment in this particular struggle. So medical examiners testified that Aaron Estrada was stabbed 7 times, mostly around the neck, face, and the head area. And investigators collected pieces of a broken kitchen knife and a pair of scissors from the crime scene. And so when Vriel's attorney, Alex Scharf, asked why he stabbed his boyfriend, Vriel said it was simply because he was scared. And he said he was being choked and he was scared that he could die. And he said that, it was a reaction. And many times during his testimony, Vriel appeared on the verge of tears. And, we only had a chance to see half of his testimony because we had a very short trial toward the end of the week because of some scheduling issues. So it is likely that this week, either today or tomorrow, Tuesday, the jury will probably hear closing arguments in this case. And again, he has pleaded not guilty, and his attorney is saying that he acted in self-defense because he was in fear for his life. Now, some of the other witnesses who testified described, but they were saying that, these men began off as friends. They met, and by the time this incident occurred, they had been together for about maybe 2 to 3 years. It also came out in testimony that Vriel had a girlfriend in Austin around the same time that he had this boyfriend here in San Antonio. And then the woman who testified, Jimena Valenzuela, had testified that she was Aaron's best friend, the victim, but also told the jury that she was also having sexual relations with Vriel. So this is definitely a very tangled story, but the bottom line is that what it sounds like is that they were smoking meth every day. In fact, witnesses testified that they would get together sometimes in the mornings before going to work, and they would smoke meth and then get on with their day. So I think that this, just based on testimony, that a lot of what occurred here, when they talk about the paranoia and just not sleeping for several days, not eating, there were a lot of factors that happened in regard, in how it led up to this particular tragedy occurring.
You're listening to The Docket, a new weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you by our sponsor, the law offices of Pat Maloney. Elizabeth, I'm interested to know, how has the prosecution reacted and kind of, I guess you would say, fought back against these claims of self-defense over, being afraid of a boyfriend?
The prosecutors in this case, Kimberly Gonzalez and Ana Ochoa Nelson, have argued that, he killed him, that there were a lot of things that happened instead of calling 911 or going to the police. They were able to talk to witnesses, and then they have, in talking about, who reported this and how this thing happened, and how they pointed out in their opening statements, the prosecutors, was that once this happened, Villarreal, and he testified to this also, he freaked out. Someone came to the door and was knocking at the door looking for Aaron, because it was actually a woman who was doing business with Aaron. Apparently, Aaron Estrada would make wreaths, like door wreaths, and he did other things. It appears that he was a very creative man who did a lot of, I guess, for lack of a better word, like crafts, and did some decorations. This woman who went to see him that day was she would pick up wreaths from him for her children's teachers' doors at school. And also, Aaron was in the process of helping this woman decorate her hairdressing booth. So she was there for a purpose and had been knocking on the door. And all of this happened in the morning on October 16th, 2015. And so she's knocking at the door, and David Villarreal is inside, and he has just stabbed his boyfriend, who was found in a fetal position in a pool of blood in one of the upstairs rooms. So he tells this woman at the door, he's not available right now. He's busy. Come back later. So he stays in the apartment, and he changes his shirt, and he takes the keys to Aaron's Mustang, and he drives over to where Jimena worked, which was, I believe she worked for a Bank of America branch. And doesn't really say anything. He said that he was freaked out and in shock, and he actually had a gash on one of his hands from, one could assume was from the knife or from a pair of scissors, but in any event, the wound occurred in the act itself. So it seems like it took a really long time for someone to actually call the police and to call first responders to respond, to this stabbing, which ended up being fatal. So prosecutors are, I believe they are on the same page with the defense that this was a drug-induced thing. But the fact that, if it was, one would assume, again, I'm not a lawyer, but one would assume that if you're fearing for your life and you do something, you're going to call the police or you're going to call somebody to try to, get assistance there at the house, in this case, in the apartment. So, Kimberly Gonzalez told the jury, after the stabbing, he went to see a friend and he's freaking out. And so this friend ends up calling another friend and telling him to go check on Aaron Estrada. So when the friend arrived and found Estrada in a fetal position on the floor, and this, this also occurred, Estrada's 2 white dogs were by his side, and all 3 of them were covered in blood. So, Prosecutor Gonzalez warned the jury that it would be hard to hear testimony and see the crime scene photos. But she said, make no mistake, this was a murder, and she asked them to find Villarreal guilty. So I'm left wondering if the defense, if Villarreal is found guilty, it makes you wonder if the defense is going to ask the jury to consider the sudden passion defense. So, Chance, we've talked about sudden passion before. We've had 2 cases now in Bexar County that where 2 women were found guilty of murder. One being Frances Hall, who was convicted 2 years ago, it'll be 2 years ago in September, of killing her husband, Bill Hall Jr., whose motorcycle crashed as he was chasing his wife and his lover in 2 vehicles that he owned, and he crashed into his wife's SUV, and he ended up dying. Well, the jury found her guilty of murder, and then they were able to consider sudden passion, and they gave her the least amount of time in that, which sudden passion changes the punishment from 5 to 99 years or life in prison, which is what you get for the first-degree felony of murder. Sudden passion becomes a second-degree felony, 2 to 20 years, and Frances Hall got 2 years. Most recently, Andira Abdelaziz was convicted of murder in the death of her nephew by marriage, and she received 2 years as well, using the sudden passion defense, because she told the jury that she acted because she was afraid that her nephew by marriage and her lover, Mohammed Abdelaziz, was beating her and would kill her. So what's interesting now that we talk about this is that in both of those cases, the women testified in their own defense. Now, we've seen David Asa Villarreal testify in his own defense as the defense began presenting their case. So it'll be interesting to see how the jury reacts to his reactions and his story as he continues telling it.
Yeah, it sounds like we're going to have another update to this case, and that'll take place right here on The Docket. And, of course, you can find The Docket in Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts other than that, and at expressnews.com/podcasts. And, of course, I've been speaking with San Antonio Express News Courts reporter Elizabeth Zavala on today's episode. Thanks for all the updates, Elizabeth, and we'll talk to you in about a week.
We'll talk then. Thank you.
And a big thank you to San Antonio Express News court reporter Elizabeth Zavala for joining me for today's episode of The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you by the law offices of Pat Maloney. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Storland.